today. We'll go ahead and get started. And please continue to add where you're calling in from in the chat, and feel free to ask questions in the chat. Great. I'll go ahead and start with introducing myself and hand it over to Jim. But welcome, everyone. My name is Andrea Getchus. I'm an associate partner at Education Elements. Prior to being at Education Elements, I was a special education teacher and instructional coach. I do a lot of work with strategies, so making sure we're aligning our approach and supporting school districts across the country. So really excited to be joining you with Jim Roberts today, who is a fantastic leader in Indiana and who just completed the strategic planning process and is going to be teaching us a bit about implementation. So I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Roberts, to share a little bit about yourself as you introduce yourself to the crew.
Great, thank you, Andrea, and thank you so much for playing that song to start things off. Elvis debuts this weekend in a movie, so awesome stuff. I'm Jim Roberts, Superintendent of the Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation in Columbus, Indiana. I spent my entire public education career here in Indiana, mostly the southern part. I have been a high school math teacher, basketball and baseball coach, as well as an high school assistant principal, assistant superintendent, and now heading into my 16th year as a superintendent overall, 9 in a school corporation, Batesville, Indiana, close to Cincinnati, Ohio. And this will be my 7th year, heading to my 7th year here in Columbus. So welcome, everybody. Glad you could join us this morning.
Thank you, Jim. So hopefully, if you all joined us today, you are here to learn a little bit more about strategic planning. And what I love about today's approach is we're going to talk to you a little bit about Education Elements' approach to strategic planning, but we also want to share what it actually looks like in practice. So Dr. Roberts is here to talk a little bit more about what happened in BCSC through the planning process and implementation. We know that having a superintendent here who has done this work is incredibly valuable. So we want to make sure to have some time to provide some Q&A so that you can ask your questions as well. So we're going to be providing a thorough overview of the planning process, but then also sharing the learning specific to Bartholomew. So just a quick overview on our process. At Education Elements, we believe in responsive strategic planning. That means that we want to make sure that we're helping you build robust plans that are, built to last, but are also built to adjust with the times. So when we think about that work, we think about really having a deep understanding of the components of a strategic plan. So we think about on the far left of this table, components that are familiar to folks are usually mission, vision, values, priorities, goals, and you have strategies within those goals. You have an approach or a methodology. Those are all pieces that I think are pretty familiar when we think about strategic planning. Something that we believe as an organization is that you don't just select these because they've happened before, that you've seen them done in other places. We make sure you have a deep understanding of the different components, because when you are developing a plan, it should represent you and your organization, as much as it being a strong best practices approach. So just something to note here, we'll show some examples of how this works, but want to share how we get there first. So this is our strategic planning methodology. We have 4 phases where we think about involving our stakeholders throughout. So something that's really important in our strategic planning process is getting folks involved early and frequently. And so I'll share an overview here, and Dr. Roberts will share more specifically about what this looked like in Bartholomew. But in Plan and Align, we engage our stakeholders. So we make a plan to think about what is the information we need, from whom do we need this information, and what is the best way to reach them. Then in Foundations, we use the data that you get from your stakeholders, and we identify the strengths and the needs. So how do we think about what's working really well within our organization, and what are some areas in which we want to focus? So we do both revision or writing of a mission, vision, values, And we also define those key priorities. So these are some screenshots here you can see, and they're actually Bartholomew's focused here as well. They had core beliefs and a vision and mission that then inform design, our third phase. This is when we start developing ideas or solutions to those big focus areas. In both plan and align and design, we're keeping that stakeholder feedback at the center, and we're also involving stakeholders in thinking about the ways to achieve those focus areas. And then finally, we go into launching. So identifying the owners, the milestones, key indicators of success, and how to communicate. So broadly, this is the process that Bartholomew went through. This is the process that we lead with our partner organizations. And our goal is that every organization has a plan that represents their community. And yes, we'll be sharing the slides at the end of the webinar in addition to a recording. So something that I like to highlight on this slide is you can see everybody goes through that same process, but everybody leaves with a different plan. And I absolutely love that about our process, is that every plan should represent the community visually, but also in the different needs of how you communicate, when you communicate. So, you can have a pretty standard approach, but the goal is for you to leave with a plan that represents the needs of your community and the values that you hold. So a few examples here. When we send you the slides, these are all hyperlinked, so you can click into them, check out some of the different plans that we've done. But let's go to the main event. Let's talk a little bit more about Bartholomew. So I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Roberts, to talk a little bit about the Bartholomew plan. What's in there? What's included? How did we get there?
Great. Thanks, Dre. And again, welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining today to allow us to share our plan from Columbus, Indiana, Bartholomew Consolidated Schools. And Dre did a nice job of hitting a chat question, I think, there in terms of we are sharing these slides, so they will be available later, right? So that everybody has access to them. So this is a shot of a few pages from our strategic plan. And just FYI for everybody, in terms of the timing of us developing our strategic plan, it was a quite interesting one. We're talking about this here in June of 2022, but we started our plan in the winter, spring of 2021, which of course was in the midst of the pandemic, and decisions being made on a daily basis related to the pandemic. And we had some contentious times here in our school corporation at school board meetings for a variety of reasons, as we were trying to make those complicated decisions, whether it be masks or no, whether it be in person or virtual, hybrid models, whatever those things were. And as we were contemplating timing and knowing that 2020 had kind of came and went, and that was a time frame we were looking at in terms of setting up a plan, a 5-year plan, and at least shooting toward 2025 or even 2030. And what is our moonshot and all those kinds of things as we dream and look ahead. And we didn't get it done in 2020, and we could have continued to put it off forever, it would seem like, as we were trying to figure things out with the pandemic, but knew that we needed to have a plan in place, and actually knew that with a plan in place, we would probably be better at the decisions we would make regarding a crisis, because we would have the plan in place to help drive those decisions. And so we dove in to the process, engaged Drea and the education elements team, and we did everything virtually. And just because of the timing, our focus groups and so forth that I will talk about here in a little bit, almost 100% of the stuff that we did to gather information, to have conversations and dialogue to move this plan forward was actually done virtually, with all the learnings we all had gained from doing virtual school for a number of months prior to that. But you see on this particular slide, just the cover page for us, and this plan actually goes to 2026 5-year plan based upon when we actually finished it, which was last year in the 2021 calendar year. A list of our core beliefs, our vision, our mission, and the vision that's listed there, it came from Indiana as a choice state. Our kids or families have a choice as to where they go to school. And as we compete with other public schools or private schools or charter schools, whatever the case might be, and compete may not be the right word, but we certainly want the students who live in our district to choose to go to our school corporation, come through our doors, give us an opportunity to educate them in the best way possible. So BCSC is the choice to learn, work, and play was our vision. And setting that as really a moonshot as we move forward. We understand exactly the number of kids who transfer in and out of our schools, whether we're gaining or losing, net-wise in terms of those number of kids. As an FYI, we are a school corporation of about 11,500 students, which is kind of an urban, suburban, rural feel because of the geographic footprint that we have. Our mission there is we develop expert learners by partnering with our community to invest in people. So our community relationships, our partnerships, the people that we serve was very important to us. And you see the list of core beliefs there, and equitable access to opportunity will resonate through our plan, whether it's in the core beliefs or in the focus areas or that pays that's listed there. Just a real quick aside, the bridge structure that's there is representative of our community. As we talk about our community, our investing in people, we have a lot of architecture, significant architecture here in our community, including the bridges that surround us, because in order to get into the city of Columbus, you're probably going to have to come across a river, and the bridges we have over those rivers have some significant architecture tied to them. So from a bridge standpoint, the connectedness we see to our entire community, we put those bridges on the three focus areas we have, which are excellence and high expectations, a healthy, safe, and welcoming environment, as well as pathways to success. We have a lot of pathways available to our students to choose as they choose our school corporation as their pathway for education.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. I think what I love about this plan too is the incorporation of the personality of the community through the bridges, and then just the unique strengths that you all have too. So
thank you. So this next slide is just a timeline of that work. And so when we started this back in the winter, spring of 2021, the very first thing we had to do was engage stakeholders. So we sought community feedback. We looked for strengths, opportunities for improvement, asked them to provide direction. I'm a music person, or at least enjoy it a lot. And I mentioned that, had that Elvis reference there earlier. We used a music theme because we thought that engaging stakeholders, you at least have to entertain a little bit sometimes, keep people interested and engaged. And so we used that, and we had various slides that had some kind of song or something tied to it to kind of start an idea. And then we would gather feedback based on that idea we were tossing out there. So for example, just to get people dreaming, we had the BCSC, Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation, list of greatest hits from the last 5 years, 2016 to 2021. Those were my first 5 years as superintendent in this corporation. And then we talked about what would the next greatest hits album look like? What would be the title of the songs that we would have? What would we actually accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years? And then what would the name of that greatest hits album be? Because just a greatest hits album title is relatively boring. So we tossed that out and just created a lot of conversation and dreaming from that particular dialogue. But that was kind of the initial community engagement piece. We rolled through that with developing then our strategic direction with mission, vision, and beliefs, the page you saw previously. We identified those initiatives, the programs, the methods we would need to keep things moving forward. We continue to seek additional stakeholder feedback in terms of whether or not we'd gotten it right with the information we had gathered and then compiled and put together. We finalized that plan, then launched our strategic plan last fall. And that launching actually continued for months as we got out and about with various groups in the community, continued to inform them of our direction and what we were trying to do. The little piece on the right is a synopsis of the different things that we did or amount of information that we gathered to drive our strategic plan. So we were informed by 19 different focus groups that we met with, all virtually. I think, Drea, you were part of many of those, if not most or all. 1,789 surveys were collected. So as we put out a survey with all of our social media sources, 1,789 were returned, and we took that feedback and built it into our work. And then we had 6 specific design workshops, so where we took the information, tried to understand the information, and put it into a plan. And we did those design workshops with our planning and steering committees as we then move things forward. And later on in our presentation, we'll talk about the institutionalization of the work here to make sure that, and this is probably a worn out phrase, but we don't want the plan to sit on a shelf and collect dust. We want it to be an active one, a live one. And how do you do that? Well, you have to institutionalize the work and make sure it is a part of the culture, the fabric of what you're trying to do to get better. And we'll talk about how that's organized in our school corporation in a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, as you all can imagine, this was a lot of work that Jim and his team did. And this is just the planning part. So if you think about, we're kind of building up to the main event here where we had, where we're talking about implementation. But as you can see, there was a lot of thoughtful engagement with the community. And just, a reminder again, that this was a challenging time, if you can imagine, in 2021, in the process of masking or all of that context is happening at the same time that this team is engaging with their stakeholders. And you had a lot of participation from your stakeholders. So I think that's something that is something important to highlight and to note, that this was a lot of the work that went into the planning. So we're going to start shifting into what the rollout looks like. What does it look like when we start shifting from making a plan, setting priorities, to actually following through on those? So I want to introduce an idea that we talk about when we talk about communication. And I think that Bartholomew really did this well. Jim's going to talk a little bit more about the specifics, but when we think about communication and in the process of rolling out your plan, it's important that you're telling your story multiple times and in different ways. And rather than just list the different ways in which you could communicate, we want to introduce this idea of a spectrum of communication. So on the far left side of your screen, you see things that are static or evergreen that you don't anticipate changing. So things like your mission, your vision, your core beliefs or values. Those are the things that are going to stay the same. And you want to put that or memorialize it in that PDF format. So we've shown you a little bit about what the planning took to get to this event, but having this, a strategic plan PDF document that isn't going to change is important. That being said, it's also important to stay dynamic. So on the far right over here, we have items that remain flexible and need to remain so that you can change as you get new information. So let's say you have a priority area and you selected a certain initiative, but through the process of doing that, you've realized it's not quite what you wanted it to be, or that it's not exactly meeting the needs. Or perhaps you're learning that something that you thought would take 5 years is actually a lot faster. So there might be some things that you want to adjust. So we think about having communication and having tools that remain dynamic are important. So the artifacts we have here in the middle are stakeholder presentations. So in addition to having that PDF, you want to make sure that you're updating folks frequently on what's the progress we're making? What are some of the initial decisions we made and how have we shifted them? So continually telling your story is very important. The other thing that you can do to remain dynamic is have a progress monitoring tool. So in this image, we have a spreadsheet that was more of a tracker, but we've seen organizations do websites that track progress to certain goals or certain initiatives. And certainly things like social media or committee updates, things like that remain dynamic are also important to include. So you might be orienting towards this PDF plan, but ultimately your plan lives in so many other ways that are equally, if not more important to making sure that your story is continuing to be told. So with that, I want to pass it over back to Jim to talk a little bit about how Bartholomew has thought about this and making sure that they're staying dynamic and updating their community on the progress of the plan.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dre. And with that prior slide, just for everybody's sake, we have each of those, and they're very important. That PDF might just be the plan itself that's available for people to take a look at and run through. Those presentations are available, but ever evolving and changing based on the circumstances today and what's going on. The progress monitoring tool is an Excel spreadsheet that we're updating and changing also on a regular basis. And each of those links are included in our cabinet meeting that we have every week. So we do have Thursday afternoon weekly cabinet meetings, and we also have 2 school board meetings a month, and the Tuesday morning after Monday school board meeting we also meet. So there are 2 weeks out of 4 that typically we're meeting twice. And again, those cabinet meeting agendas include the links to whatever tools we are using so we can quickly jump into them, have conversation, make updates if necessary, and then continue moving on. It's another part of that, just building into your work, the process of continuing to get better and making this a live document or plan and moving it forward. So with that in mind, and as we try to continue to get better and work the plan, a part of our implementation, after going through the process of gathering the information, building the plan, sharing it back with our stakeholders within the community, was, okay, how do we now get this in and start working it? A way that we were able to find to do that is we took advantage of something called a flexibility waiver here in the state of Indiana. So House Bill 1003 was passed just a couple of years ago. And one of the things House Bill 1003 allows school corporations to do is to file for a waiver in regards to how you count time. In Indiana, we have 180 student days. Then I have my teachers on contract for 182 and a half days. And that number varies. 180 is the same for every corporation in Indiana, but the number of contract days for teachers will vary from maybe just 181 or something like that up to, I've seen the highest is maybe 187. But with 182 and a half as our number, trying to get professional development for our teachers to help us, or all of our staff actually, to help us introduce the plan was going to be a real challenge. And so we asked for a waiver so that we could count time in minutes or hours instead of days. And that was granted. And the reason it was granted is because our typical instructional day is longer than the state requirement, minimum requirement. So for elementary schools in Indiana, the minimum number of hours per day instructionally, not counting lunch or recess, is 5. The minimum number of hours for high schools or secondary schools, middle and high schools, is 6. Our hours are basically 6 and 7 for elementary and high school. So doing the math, we had plenty of time that we could say, hey, here's an idea that we have is allow us to have a 176-day contract, 176 instructional days, and then we'll take 4 days, have students stay at home, which is a commitment by our parents, a sacrifice perhaps by our parents to do that. But we're going to do professional development on those days. And so we rolled through that, and that's how we got things started. So you see at the bottom of this slide, the 10 days total of full day PD already on the calendar. We scheduled 2 for the spring semester of this past school year, 21-22, and we've already then had those 2 days. We have 4 scheduled for 22-23 next school year and 4 more for the following school year, 23-24. So basically had 10 full days of professional development built into the schedule after completion of our strategic plan, but we have our entire staff together. I'm just noticing a typo for us on this one, Dre, is that 200 staff members is 2,000, which is the same number it is on the next page, which I think we have 2,000 listed there. So our school corporation has basically 2,000 staff members. So when we look at certificated staff, I have about 800. If I look at classified or support staff, we have about 1,200. So 2,000 staff members. It's one thing to get to our instructional staff members and figure out some things to do professionally or in a professional development way. It's another when you're trying to engage your custodians, your teachers' assistants, your secretaries or administrative clerical assistants, your food service workers, bus drivers, maintenance, security, student resource officers, whatever those other positions are. 2,000 people we're trying to get on the same page to work the plan so that we're doing the best thing that we possibly can be for our kids. So the very first one that we had back in February was a full day PD focusing on just introducing this plan. And you can see the quick timeline of how things are lined up for that day. We had just teachers come in 7:45 to 8:30, kind of do whatever you needed to do to get ready for the day, had a break to report to a certain area because we did this streaming, but then had teachers in place. Our school corporation is 18 school buildings. So besides the adult buildings, we have like the one I'm currently in, our administration building, we have 18 school buildings, 11 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, 3 high schools, and then a couple of other, a pre-K only one, another alternative education school. We get to 18. We had them reporting to certain locations within those buildings. I was in a classroom in a building presenting live, and then that was being streamed out to them, all the other sites that we have in the corporation. So I kicked that off with this strategic presentation. I think the presentation that was on the slide that Drea focused on earlier was a part of that. So here's a slideshow or presentation. We get all that information through, and then there was a list of discussion questions. And so they broke out into groups in their buildings and went through the discussion questions to talk about the strategic plan, which had just been introduced. We then took a break, and then we jumped into the UDL PBIS connection. As a school corporation, we are deeply embedded, more than a decade, about 15 years of universal design for learning, as well as then positive behavior instructional support is the word we use instead of intervention that we have for our students. So we reacclimated ourselves to that, realizing that we have new staff coming and going all the time who are getting some training. We also have that support staff, custodians, bus drivers, and so forth, who may not have had similar training. And we had an hour and 20 minutes of work there. I came back on live, did a wrap up of the morning's activities, sent everybody out off to lunch, and then they came back into the buildings for the afternoon. In the afternoon, we give the buildings some strategic direction saying, hey, here are the things we want you to think about related to our strategic plan, but your building is going to look different than this building, this program, this department. So work on that. Give us an agenda, how you're going to get through things, but from 12:30 to 3:15, that is your time. And so that's how we did the very first one. It was an introductory situation, jumped into UDL PBIS, trying to get all 2,000 staff members to a similar place, at least from their capacity to serve our students, and then kept moving through. So then this next slide is our—
Can I highlight something here, Jim?
Yes.
Sorry. I think something that is really impactful here is both the creativity with getting the days and then also the flexibility. And, you know, a slide doesn't do it justice, but you all had both a hybrid dynamic going on too. So I think that's something really creative that happened in Bartholomew. So Jim was on a video and folks were in their different schools. So it was just a really cool way to bring people together when they couldn't all physically be together. So just wanted to brag on you a little bit on that one.
Thanks, Drea. And we were using a lot of the learnings we had right from all the virtual instruction that we had done and putting that into use with adults and PD and doing it synchronously. If you go back to that other slide, just 1 second, I did not point out, Drea, in a part of this work, and I think it's an exciting part, is that we also took the time or the opportunity to restructure or re-image ourselves in terms of our logo, our tagline, our icon. And we even designed that icon, that check mark there, as a standalone thing. I have a baseball cap with just the check mark on it. So it doesn't have to have BCSC or Together We Learn. We talked about the Nike. You don't need to see the word Nike whenever you see the swoosh. So we had a lot of conversations about what are the things that would identify BCSC. Together We Learn. It's amazing how much time it takes to come up with a few words sometimes. And just getting those 3 words right, it took a long, long time, but we did, I think. And we made that a part of our presentation, 2 slides as a part of our presentation were an explanation of that icon and the fact that there's kind of a road you can see there that signifies the pathways we make available to students. The check mark is they've chosen us as a school corporation to take advantage of those pathways. And so the check mark there, and then Together We Learn is symbolic of or speaks to our efforts to work together and to be collaborative with our entire community, all of our stakeholders. And it is that village kind of situation in terms of moving all of us, our kids, forward. And I think what's interesting, I have my challengers as well as we all do. And sometimes people I think don't agree with me very often. I've been pleasantly surprised to see the hashtag Together We Learn used by some individuals in our school corporation who I thought, just might not always have something that they wanted to jump on and share with us, just detractors, whatever the case might be. But that particular tagline, Together We Learn, has really become something that's used throughout our corporation and is a part of our social media efforts with the hashtag Together We Learn.
I love that. Thank you.
You're welcome. So the second PD day was in April, and I'll make note that as we again ask our community to keep kids home for a full day so we can learn, which again is a commitment, we did try to tie those days to days where kids might be already out, and so it would give parents a chance to maybe take an extra day. So we didn't have President's Day off in the past, but we took President's Day off in February. That's that first professional development day. This one was tied to Good Friday. We do have Good Friday off in this community. And so we had a Thursday off as well to do PD so that there was a 4-day weekend. All of a sudden that was built in for families who might wish to take advantage of that. The extra days that we'll have in the fall, we have one tied to Labor Day weekend and we have one tied to Thanksgiving week. It's the Monday following Thanksgiving week, gives maybe an extra day of travel or whatever else is going on around Thanksgiving. And so we try to kind of have some natural tie-ins with those days, not just making them random Wednesdays, perhaps in the middle of a week. Just an FYI there. The second one, we really jumped into implementing those priorities and making sure that we had a full day of choices and activities and try to hit the needs of every single staff member. And again, it's not easy with 2,000 of them. But as an example, we brought our support staff into our auditorium at Columbus East High School, which seats about 1,000 people. All of our support staff was able to get in there. We had a speaker there just talking in general terms about the value that we all bring to the school corporation, the importance of understanding the things that we're talking about, and then being good to our kids and that they can see them modeling, our kids can see them modeling just appropriate things and the things we're trying to accomplish on a daily basis. So again, 2,000 staff members was the focus. All of our staff had the option to choose PD that was live streamed and or in person. I included that or mentioned that auditorium situation with about 1,000 people in it. And then we had key topics from our strategic plan, UDL again, PBIS again, cultural responsiveness, cultural sustainability, equitable access, which is throughout our document. We talk about, do our students actually have equitable access? What are we doing to provide that for them? And we have created an internal tool in a partnership with a group in our community called Equity Works. That is a tool that we can give our buildings, our programs, our departments to evaluate themselves to see if they indeed are providing equitable access from an affordability standpoint, awareness, transportation access, all those kinds of things. So it has 7 dimensions tied to it. It's a tool that we've rolled out and are starting to use just from this professional development day. So we took feedback that we learned from the first one, built this second day based upon that. And the screenshot that's on this particular slide is actually a website that we created. So we did create a website for each day that our staff members can go to, check on the options that are available. We have professional growth points in Indiana that teachers can check on. And if you get 90 professional growth points over a 5-year period of time, you can renew your teacher's license. So professional growth points are available from this, and also the survey that we ask for feedback after each of our sessions is available on this site.
Yeah, and I think something that's been really interesting here is, you know, we all in all organizations have professional development days, but you all have specifically tied it to those strategic priorities. So folks are seeing and hearing the strategic plan multiple times and are being reminded. So it's just something for folks to note, that it's important to continue to tie it back.
Yeah, thanks, Dre. And the agenda for this day, I have the topics listed out there, but was similar to the first one in that the morning was very corporation driven. Here are the topics. Let's get to those. We are driving the presentations. We've chosen the facilitators or the presenters, whatever that might be, to get the job done, the training completed. Then the afternoon, we gave things back to the building. At the building level, said, okay, we need to continue the focus, but as a building, Lincoln Elementary School, Columbus North High School, Central Middle School, whatever building it was, take this and run with it with the staff that you have.
Yeah, thank you. So this kind of brings us into progress. So there's a lot of, you know, we talk a lot about this, and I didn't add this slide, but we talk about how it's important to have fidelity of implementation. So making sure that we're doing the things that we're saying we're going to do, which is a lot of what Jim just talked about, is having the professional development. But then the other part of that is thinking about how successful are we on these different efforts. So this next portion of our presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the progress, what's been happening as a result of this work.
Yeah, thank you, Dre. And so you can put things in place, but if you don't measure how well you're doing, you're really not going to get better. What gets measured gets improved typically. And so as we did our PD days specifically, because we don't have a lot of measurements, you have to evaluate whether or not the plan itself is working. The strategies are only getting implemented now, but we can track how well the PD is going, for example. So each of our 2 sessions, we have a very formal process for gaining feedback. And for each of the professional development days that we've had with 2,000 staff members potentially participating, we've had over 1,200 survey responses back each time. So that's a lot of information. And a lot of good comes out of that in terms of, hey, great job. There's also some really good constructive criticism in there as to how to design things. So we are continually evaluating and utilizing that feedback data to move forward and get better with the professional development and make sure that we are aligning. We have a professional development team that's made up of administrators, school board members, because they are very invested in this. They have to be, teachers, support staff members, and from a teacher standpoint, and I'll mention CEA here a couple of times, I think in the next few slides. CEA is our Columbus Educators Association, and we make sure that they appoint individuals to this. We need their support. We need their backing whenever we come up with a plan and we roll it out, because without that, we might have some challenges for those particular days. So they are engaged, and you'll see, I placed the hashtag 8 to 3 PD on there because after the first one, that became our thing for PD. We shortened the time from 7:45 to 3:15. We shortened that initial time just 8 to 3. Keep it clean. 8 o'clock, you're coming in. We don't have that teacher time necessarily at the beginning, teacher time at the end. You're coming at 8 o'clock. and we're getting busy right then. And we're going to jump into the day and we're going to finish by 3 o'clock. And then we actually took the middle part of the day, the lunchtime, and created any of their breaks or time to work together, because part of the feedback we got was, gosh, we have this day where kids aren't here. We would love to meet with each other. We'd love to have some team meetings, talk about data and all those kinds of things. Well, as we're trying to get the very specifics of this plan delivered, the professional development completed, and that allows us to move forward with it, we weren't sure how to work that out until we got the feedback, and we decided to end time a little bit earlier. So we ended, instead of 11:20 or 11:30, giving only an hour for lunch, we now end at 10:45 in this hashtag 8 to 3 PD day. And they have from 10:45 to 12:30 to do whatever they want. They could choose to meet for an hour and 45 minutes and not go to lunch, or they could go to the favorite Mexican restaurant down by Columbus North High School and hang out in the back for an hour and 45 minutes and talk about whatever they need to talk about, even if it's just relaxing and taking their time. Because these are hard jobs. They are tough times. And it's not only about taking care of our students, it's about taking care of ourselves and our staff members. And so we found that time could be a piece that allows us to do that, both from staff members seeing that from us, that, hey, we care about that. We want to give you time to collaborate, talk amongst yourselves, and take care of yourselves, as well as it could be productive, because we have to have lunch at some point in time. And it gave them an expanded period of time to work together. And the feedback after that one, that was the most positive part of the day. So all the things we accomplished during that day, and I don't think it's surprising that feedback sometimes is going to come back like that. And actually, the two things that we learned from that day, the biggest things, was the session we had in the morning of the 800 to 1,000 support staff members who were at Columbus East Auditorium, about how that resonated with them. So we're inviting that person back to do a keynote for everybody in the September PD we're having at the beginning of the school year here. And then that part of 10:45 to 12:30 in the middle of the day, just providing that open time that we're not, wherever you go, just be back to get started at 12:30, because that's when the building level stuff will take off. So staying on top of it, constant feedback, doing something with that feedback, because if you ask for feedback and don't do anything, don't ask for feedback again, because you're not going to get it.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something that you all have done particularly well, because what you did during the process of planning has kind of translated here. So people are used to giving feedback, and they're probably more likely to give it because they know you're going to do something with it. So I think that's something that we've seen be really successful here. But then when the difference between a successful plan and not is really that follow through.
It was interesting, Dre, in that I thought we nailed it in terms of organizing and delivering on the first PD day. Our feedback didn't necessarily tell us that was the case. And so we made some improvements, came back and did it again. And the feedback after the second one was closer to we nailed it than perhaps the first one. So it's continual. Again, everything that we do in our business, our world is to just continue to find ways to get better. And you can't do that without evaluating what you've just done and being okay with criticism and taking advantage of the opportunities that have been suggested and improving upon them.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, this page is just progress. It's just another document we have. I mentioned earlier that our cabinet meetings have a few links on them that tie back to the strategic planning work, so that we can talk about them all the time. And cabinet members, I have 7 cabinet members. So when we meet, it's 8 of us total. That I asked to keep this updated and moving forward. So this is just the very first focus area that we have, which is excellence and high expectations. It gets into the 2 initiatives that we have, the programs and methods we've built in, and then which cabinet member is responsible for that. You will notice marketing on there. Although marketing, Josh is the name of the person who's over our marketing department, is not on the cabinet. He does attend every cabinet meeting. So I actually have 9 who are in the room. And then my administrative assistant who will attend regularly as well. But Josh is there so he can hear everything and then help us figure out ways to market it and move us forward. You have the what and the when, the potential investments in terms of funding. And then we have the fall spring of 2021, you can see, and then heading into 2022 as we try to work each of these things out. So this is a live document that we continue to go into on a routine basis, update, and try to figure out whether or not we're making progress in what we say that we're trying to do in those particular areas.
Yeah, and I think something to highlight here is, the first part is the PD that you do with folks and all the stuff that is very visual, or like people can see what's happening. And this is what happens in the background, is to make sure that, the tactical pieces are happening. So you kind of have to have both. You have to have the the tactical action items, and you have to have the presentations and the PD.
Yeah, with the highlighted area there, and the arrow was on there, maybe unintentionally, Drea, but the one that says pathway paraeducators and C4 education professions, all that's about teacher recruitment, which we're all about right now. As we face the teacher shortages we have, we're trying to get more qualified individuals to apply for the openings we have. We hire about 80 to 90 new teachers per year, and we want to have the highest quality one. So you see the dollar investments. We have $500,000 of ESSER funds that are tied into that, as well as a referendum we passed. We went to our taxpayers and asked for money, and they have given us $5.3 million a year to spend on our staff. That's in addition to the dollars that come from the state of Indiana. So how do we utilize those dollars as best we can to form programs like the Pathway Paraeducators program, which is taking paraeducators already in our school. They've already chosen to work for us. What can we do to get them into school, get them a teacher's license and put them back into the classroom, but now as a qualified credentialed teacher instead of as a teacher assistant without that. So we have 9 individuals that we are paying for their education right now to hopefully be able to complete that within the next year, 2-year program, and be able to be teachers for us within the next 12 months.
I love that. Yeah. So it just feels like a lot of things are coalescing around these priorities. Yeah. And this last piece I think is important too, is how do you actually make sure that what you planned for happens? How do you build this into the fiber of your teams?
Yeah. And then this is key. You have to have the support of the structure in place to be able to keep the plan moving forward. And the way that we do it is, like most school corporations in the US, we have a school board, and maybe across the world, some governing body, right, who's over us besides the superintendent or leader of that school corporation. So we have the board, and then we have our support staff roundtable, which represents our classified staff. They meet quarterly. We have our Columbus Educators Association, which at least formally, as per the state of Indiana, represents all of our certificated employees, at least those who are in the classroom. And there are formal things that we have to pay attention to as per Indiana code or state statute. There's a discussions, where discussions is actually a formal term in this context, as well as collective bargaining. And then we also have them appointed to certain committees. Our CIC is our Continuous Improvement Council, and that council, or a council, is at every building that we have, or at least every school level building that we have. The co-chairs are the building principal and a CEA appointment, and they then co-chair that work, bring in stakeholders from the building. That does include support staff, other CEA members, as well as teachers who have chosen not to be a part of the Teachers Association. So we get that representation, and that group is responsible for driving improvement in that building. And then the CCIC is our Corporation Continuous Improvement Council. It includes members of our school board, members from my cabinet, including myself. I serve as the co-chair, members from CEA, the Teachers Association, as well as other teachers, and members from our community. So we're a community that has Cummins engines in it. I don't know if you've heard of Cummins engines or not, but it is a Fortune 500 company, one of the bigger companies in the US. And they were probably largely popular for diesel engines, but they are getting into other sustainable energies now with electric and hybrid and so forth. But Cummins, we always make sure we have a representative from Cummins on this, as well as many others in the community. That's those CEA appointments that I mentioned. We also do ourselves select teachers who we know are not CEA members to get more broad representation in the conversations for the group. And then myself and the cabinet are a part of the decision-making process, I think, obviously, and then our school board. So you see that kind of counterclockwise wheel that's happening there in terms of getting everybody engaged, and then beginning to process that engagement formally, so that as we have recommendations to the board, for example, our strategic plan had to eventually be formally presented to our school board and accepted or approved by them. That's the wheel that we use to get through all of the people within our internal school community, as well as the external community, the people we serve, part of that process. And so we feel like using this process, we have internalized our work. And if we're talking specifically about this strategic plan, it's been internalized through this, that it's just a piece. It's a part of what we're trying to accomplish or do on a daily basis.
Yeah. I every time I talk to Jim, I hear a little bit more about how there are different teams or different individuals who are taking on leadership roles. So I think it's something that I just want to highlight and recommend for people as you're implementing your plans is, how are you leveraging the leaders within your organization? How are you thinking about the people who have really stepped up? And creating a role for them or aligning their interest with the need that you all have. So with that, I'm going to transition us over to Q&A. So please, there is a Q&A option on the webinar, but you can also add to the chat. I'll kick us off with a few questions, but please continue to add to the chat. My first question for you, Jim, is, we talked about how this was a challenging time. It was a difficult time in a, with a lot going on. We were doing a lot of this virtually. And, but you still made the choice to do it. We had a lot of people who were saying, this doesn't feel like the right time. It's too hectic. Let's wait. And so I'm curious if you could share a little bit about, why make the choice to do it at even, despite it being a difficult time, and yeah, any recommendations you have for folks.
Sure. So a couple of things on that, Drea. First, I don't know if there's ever a great time to do it, right? There's always something facing us as educators. That's the next challenge, crisis thing to do. Time is at a premium, but we don't have any more time than what we're already given with the 24 hours in a day and the 7 days in a week. So as we contemplated moving forward, we did put it on pause during 2020, but as we continue to move forward, we knew we needed to get the plan completed. We knew we needed further alignment. And we also, as we would have to continue to make really tough decisions regarding the pandemic or whatever else faced us, we had to have something in place to work from or through. It's pretty hard to make good decisions if you haven't set that direction that you can pivot everything toward or work toward and try to move forward. So that was key, is that even in the middle of a pandemic, do we have a plan that we could have a true north and point things to and try to continue moving our kids in a certain direction, regardless of the instructional methods or whatever else that we were trying to put into place. And then what we found, and it was in part, I guess, a part of our conversation, but we found it to be therapeutic because we were dealing with a lot of stuff. All of us were dealing with a lot of stuff. And we found these conversations, we could set aside time, meet with you, Andrea, or just together with our different focus groups and so forth, that was therapeutic, healthy for us as we were going through stuff we kind of knew about. We'd had training, and I have a decent background in strategic planning and continuous improvement and stakeholder engagement and those kinds of things. And so it was therapeutic to get back to that. And then we found that even though it was in the middle of the pandemic and we did most things virtually, doing those things virtually may have given us more feedback from a quantity standpoint than what we would have received before. So as an example, our focus groups were done virtually, and we asked for feedback that way. And so the feedback we gathered was immediate. It was electronic, which made it easier to quickly compile and to make sense of. Where my past life, I had chart papers all over the walls and sticky notes and those kinds of things. And it was a lot of fun, and table talks and whatnot. We'd get that stuff up. Then we'd have to take time after to really digest it, put it together and make sense of it. Things were happening in real time with the virtual presentations, engagement that we set up. So the reason was that there was no right time, anytime. Let's get after it. We needed to do it then. And we knew that it would help us with our continuing pandemic related decisions and questions that would come up. We found it to be therapeutic and healthy. And then we also found that maybe doing it at that time was helpful because we were able to gather feedback pretty quickly, put it together and turn things around faster than if we were doing it in person. Now there's importance to being in person too, but it was totally a side benefit I didn't expect in terms of how that all worked.
Yeah. I when I talk about this with people, I say, if you do it well, it feels like one of those really good group projects. And I feel like that's kind of what happened here too, is like you had something that you could work around that was more proactive than reactive to the times. Another question that's come in is related to, you have those days and you certainly got creative with the use of the days. I wonder if you have a recommendation for folks if they don't, they might not have the availability or the days that are supported by the state, but any other ways that you would recommend getting creative with, getting folks together, providing professional development that aligns to the strategic plan?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And without knowing what every other state has to offer or other countries internationally, whatever, because I know that we have people from all over on the call. leveraging any time you can get is going to be key, and being very specific with that use of time. So as an example, without this, I have 182 and a half days. And so knowing that I have 2.5 days besides 180 days, if that's what I have, are those just teacher plan times where we say you come in and you're going to work to get ready for the school year, or are they intentional in terms of the time toward the strategic plan and what we're trying to accomplish in order to have those work that way? And again, not knowing the relationships everywhere, or even how the teachers associations, unions might be involved or engaged everywhere, I would have to go through and work with them to figure out that time. It would also be then what's the length of my contract day that I have in terms of beginning time and an end time, and are there times during that we can leverage? And then if none of that can really work, how can we as a cabinet creatively and with the different people that we have as a part of our organization give teachers time during the workday where we say, and I'm going to say this carefully because I know substitute teachers are hard to find. So putting substitute teachers aside and whether or not you can find them is, can me and my cabinet, can we find others that aren't in the classroom on a regular basis, that although their job is very important for that day, that time, we need them to do X, Y, or Z, which is to sub in this classroom so we can get this department aside, or this grade level, or this group of people, and give them time to think and talk without having them compromise their prep period or some other time of day that they've built in, and that's just a part of them being them and feeling okay. So I don't know that's a great answer in terms of that, because the creativity is really hard. You're locked into time and you're by contract. And if you just don't have time before the school day, after the school day, or the number of days built in around the 180 days or whatever it is during the school day, how can you creatively carve out time for teachers to do that, which might mean us saying, I'm going to raise my hand, principal, assistant principal, maybe a dean, a guidance counselor, some other person. Maybe we have department heads for our core areas of math, science, social studies. I missed one there. Math, science, social studies, English. So we have those 4 people available. They're not always in a classroom. So that may be a way to do it. And I think when you do that, your teachers are going to feel pretty valued, because they were able to take time during the regular contract day to work on getting better, versus having to say, okay, we'll stay from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock tonight. I found that doesn't work very well.
Yeah. And you know what I hear from that, Jim, is like you and your team understood the constraints. So you understood both like what was not possible, but then you also understood what was available to you. So you had your cabinet or you have your principal. So that's something that we see really strong organizations when they're implementing their plans, is thinking within the structures that you have and then pushing them and stretching them. So, you know, the state gives you those days, but you all thought about how you added them to times that were already convenient for families, yeah. Or how you were going to be able to pay your employees when they were going to be there. So it's almost like you think of what you need and then kind of play within the parameters that you have, is what I heard in that as a recommendation.
I think it's a good summary of that, Dre. And I know people watching can't see what's on my chalkboard, and it is a chalkboard behind me. The chalkboard behind me, I've listed out kind of a continuous improvement process, and you do get into the what and the how, right? So our strategic planning efforts were to set the what. It was to set direction. This is what we're going to accomplish. The how is where you have to get creative, and then you have to figure out how to allocate resources, which typically are finite. The time that we have with our staff is a finite thing. So how do we leverage that time and fix it? The dollars that we are going to get are finite unless we come up with something. And what we did here is we went to the voters and had a months-long campaign, had to almost campaign for political office to get them to vote on a referendum that gave us some extra dollars. But still, that's a finite thing. So how do I leverage that to then get the things done that we have? And you're going to have a finite number of staff members, 2,000. Well, what if I want 2,002? I may not be able to afford that. So I've got to figure out how to use the dollars I have to still stay at 2,000, but to have the person that I need doing the things that they have to do. We have hired full-time substitute teachers too in our building, so they receive benefits, and they are there all the time. It's just at least an extra person or two that helps us try to figure out a way to get into classrooms and help when things are needed.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. There's another question from an attendee. I love this question. So you're getting a lot of information during your virtual sessions, real-time sessions, and people are coming up with new information, data, questions, or proposals. Is there a way that people can add to the plan or suggest updates, or do you table those for a different time?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we do not have an active format right now available, whereas people had ideas, they could add them to the list and they would go onto the list. But that maybe is something we need to add to our website under that strategic planning tab. With that said, and going back to keeping this or maintaining a live document, we'll be bringing this document back up in front and sharing with stakeholders on a routine basis. So there's at least a without opening it wide to the public at large, there are structured groups, including the ones in that counterclockwise institutionalization, that will constantly have that ability as we put things back in front of them. We also run continually satisfaction surveys. And as you can imagine, in those satisfaction surveys, we get a lot of ideas that could go in this plan. So and this is actually a part of the strategic plan, will administer a stakeholder satisfaction survey to our staff members, those 2,000, twice per year. So we did it twice in just this past school year and got a lot of feedback, and we'll do it twice the next school year. And we're trying to get higher each time with that. And we take every comment, process those, and see what ideas come from those. So that would be, I guess, one formal way of doing that. But that's an idea I think we can add to our strategic plan, have a link to go in and just continue to add things to it. Thank you.
Well, and I'll add too, I mean, some of the recommendations, and we've done this with your team before, Jim, is a few things structurally that you can build in to have ongoing feedback. So the first is retrospective. So building in time for folks to reflect on the progress of the strategic plan. So those different groups that Jim talked about, and I'll just show on the side, like you would lead some sort of reflection or retrospective with these individual groups to see what's going well, what do we want to like start, stop, continue to do, and adapt course. So make sure that we're adjusting within the plan that we created. The other piece is developing a governance structure that helps people bring proposals. So, in this phase of the work that Bartholomew is in, we're doing a lot of communication and explaining the process, but down the line, people are going to start having ideas, which is awesome. That's what we want. So how do we kind of filter those and say, we're going to have to make choices. And what we've seen people do is when we go through prioritization in selecting the initiatives, we kind of do that again. And we say, does it still make sense for us to prioritize these things? Is there a better way to do it? Are there other ways we might do it? And I think something that is key is going back to those key beliefs and mission, vision, values. Is this new proposal going to help us achieve those things that are still core to the plan? And if so, then let's adjust, let's adapt, and we'll communicate why we did that.
Yeah. Thanks for that piece, Dre. And as you were talking, I was also thinking about just the importance of having this plan to have those kind of conversations about, because in lieu of a plan, if I have those groups of people, how do I lead or start that conversation? If I'm having an evaluation meeting with one of my cabinet members, how do I lead the conversation without a plan in place? Because for us, it does become, so where are you with, helping with your part of the plan? Or if they have a question or an idea or a proposal, where does that fall on the plan in terms of advancing the focus areas we have, our core beliefs, our mission or vision? So it just helps with CEA, with any of those other groups. Something comes up, how does that contribute to leading us forward or advancing the plan? And again, in lieu of that, and not having a plan in place, you can't even ask that really important question.
Yeah. Well, we're right about at time, so I'll ask you one last question. Sure. We'll close out here. But Jim, any advice you would give to leaders who are either going to start their strat planning process or implementing their plan?
I had on mute there for just a second, Dre, because my clock is telling us it's time as well. I don't know if you can hear the chimes on my clock too, but I was trying to pause there. So advice for people looking to start a plan is there is no better time than now. And then in order to start that and realizing that it is now, check your leadership. Get your cabinet or whatever your leadership structure is together, get with your board or whatever governance structure you have, begin that conversation about what it is you think that group wants first, because those individuals have been either elected, at least in our case, or appointed as leaders, and their opinion really matters. but then create the structure to understand from the rest of your stakeholders what that looks like from a strategic planning standpoint. So regardless of who you choose to do it, we chose education elements and had a great experience with that. But regardless of what that's the direction that you go or not, starting internally with those people, having that dialogue, trying to set the what is our direction before you worry about how you're going to accomplish that, and then working with other stakeholder groups is going to be key. And that one slide that you've showed a couple of times, Drea, with our institution, how we've institutionalized our structure, understanding whether or not you have something like that. Did you have pieces in place to work through your organization that you can have these kind of conversations? If not, how do you go about creating those groups so that all, in our case, 2,000 staff members are somehow represented in this dialogue over time? And then you can kickstart what that planning piece looks like.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Jim. And thanks to everyone who stayed on those extra 2 minutes. Really appreciate you. And just so participants know, you'll get the recording of today and the slides following our conversation. So thank you again, Jim. And thanks everyone who joined us.
Welcome, Dre. Thank you.
Have a good one, everyone.